Chapter 1. The Cage. The sprawling marketplace of Clivorn Station was a kaleidoscope of colors, sounds, and smells. Stalls lined every corner of the station's central atrium, bursting with goods from all over the galaxy. Traders shouted in countless alien dialects, their voices blending into a chaotic symphony. The air was thick with the scents of exotic spices, machine oil, and recycled oxygen, creating a heady mix that felt almost alive. Captain Alex Merrick had always felt out of place in places like this. As a former soldier, he preferred structure and predictability, and Clivorn Station was the antithesis of both. Now a freelance pilot, Alex made his living running cargo for anyone who could pay, but he avoided the darker corners of the galaxy's trade routes whenever possible. Unfortunately, Clivorn was one of the only stations within range where he could refuel and resupply without breaking the bank. He kept his head low as he navigated the crowded corridors, trying to avoid the pickpockets and con artists that thrived in places like this. His destination was a reputable mechanic shop near the station's core, but as he passed a narrow alley, something caught his attention. A faint sound, a soft whimper, barely audible over the din of the market, reached his ears. Alex paused, his instincts kicking in. Years of military service had honed his ability to pick up on details others might miss, and something about that sound set him on edge. He turned toward the alley, his hand instinctively moving to the sidearm holstered at his hip. The alley was darker than the rest of the marketplace, its walls covered in grime and flickering neon advertisements. It was lined with cages, rusted, dirty things that reeked of neglect. Inside were creatures of all shapes and sizes, many of them clearly malnourished or injured. Most were small animals, exotic pets meant for wealthy collectors. But near the back of the alley, something larger moved. Alex's breath caught as he saw her. She was humanoid, though her lavender skin and silvery hair marked her as something far from human. Her limbs were bound by heavy chains that glowed faintly with a pulsing energy, and her wrists and ankles were bruised where the restraints had dug into her flesh. Her golden eyes, luminous and striking, locked onto his, filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. Alex felt a surge of anger well up inside him. He had seen things like this before back on the front lines of the war, where prisoners and refugees were often treated like cargo. It never got easier to stomach. "Hey!" he barked, his voice cutting through the noise of the alley. A wiry alien lounging nearby turned toward him. The creature had sharp, insect-like features, its multifaceted eyes glinting in the dim light. It grinned, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "Ah, a potential buyer," it said in heavily accented Galactic common. "You've got a good eye, human. The Vixian is one of my finest specimens." Alex's jaw tightened. Specimen? She's not an animal. She's a sentient being. The merchant waved a clawed hand dismissively. Sentient or not, she's property. Very rare, very valuable. You won't find another like her in this quadrant. Alex glanced back at the woman in the cage. Her shoulders were slumped, but her eyes never wavered. There was a fierceness in her gaze that spoke volumes, even though she said nothing. "How did you get her?" Alex asked, his voice low and dangerous. The merchant chuckled. "She was found drifting in the wreckage of a Vixian colony ship. Poor thing must have been the last survivor. A lucky catch for us. She's been trained, you know, very obedient." Alex felt his temper rising, but he forced himself to stay calm. "How much?" he asked, his tone cold. The merchant's grin widened. "Ah, a man of business. For her? 20,000 credits." Alex's stomach sank. That was more than double what he had in his account. He glanced at the woman again, noting the way her hands trembled slightly despite her defiant posture. She wouldn't last much longer in this hellhole. "I'll give you 5, Alex said, trying to keep his voice steady. The merchant hissed, its mandibles clicking in annoyance. 5? Do you think this is a charity? 20, or no deal." Alex clenched his fists, his mind racing. He couldn't leave her here, not like this. But he didn't have the money, and trying to take her by force would likely end with both of them dead or worse. 10, he countered, his voice firm, and I'll throw in a shipment of spare ship parts. Top quality. The merchant's eyes narrowed, its mandibles twitching. 15. Final offer. Alex hesitated. 15,000 credits would drain his savings and leave him with barely enough to refuel his ship. But as he looked at the woman again, he knew he couldn't walk away. "Deal," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. The merchant's grin returned. "Excellent. She's all yours." The transaction was quick, and within minutes, Alex found himself standing outside the alley with the woman at his side. Her chains had been removed, though her wrists and ankles were still raw and bruised. She walked stiffly, her movements cautious and deliberate. Alex led her to his ship, a sturdy freighter docked at the edge of the station. The silence between them was thick, but he didn't press her to speak. She had been through enough. When they reached the ship, Alex gestured for her to follow him inside. "You're safe now," he said, his voice softer than before. "No one's going to hurt you." She hesitated for a moment before stepping into the ship. Her golden eyes scanned the interior, taking in every detail. Alex led her to the small medical bay, where he gestured for her to sit. "Let me take a look at those wounds," he said, grabbing a medkit from a nearby cabinet. She didn't move, her gaze fixed on him. For a moment, Alex thought she might refuse, but then she nodded, her movements slow and deliberate. As he cleaned and bandaged her injuries, Alex couldn't help but notice the faint scars that covered her arms and shoulders. Whoever had captured her had been brutal. The thought made his stomach churn. "Do you have a name?" he asked gently. She hesitated before speaking, her voice quiet but steady. "Caliph." Alex nodded. "I'm Alex. It's nice to meet you, Caliph." Her eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of gratitude in her gaze. "Thank you," she said softly. Alex smiled faintly. "You don't have to thank me. I just did what anyone would do." Calitha's expression hardened slightly. "Not anyone," she said. "You chose to help me when others wouldn't. That means something." Alex wasn't sure how to respond, so he simply nodded. As he finished tending to her wounds, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whoever had captured Caliph wouldn't let her go so easily, and Alex had just made himself a target. But as he looked at her, sitting quietly but with an undeniable strength in her eyes, he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't let her be chained again. Chapter 2. The Price of Freedom. The freighter's engines hummed softly, a steady rhythm that filled the otherwise silent ship. Caliph sat on the edge of the medical bay cot, her luminous golden eyes watching Alex as he worked at the terminal nearby. Her posture was tense, her shoulders stiff, and her hands rested in her lap, fingers interlocked tightly. Alex glanced at her occasionally, unsure of how to approach the growing silence. He had freed her, yes, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Caliph still carried invisible chains, ones far heavier than the glowing restraints that had bound her before. He finally broke the silence. "You hungry?" he asked, his voice casual but gentle. Caliph blinked, as though the question startled her. I don't know." Alex frowned. "You don't know?" She hesitated before replying. "It's been a long time since anyone cared if I was hungry." The words hit Alex like a punch to the gut. He closed the terminal and stood, walking toward the small galley on the other side of the ship. "Well, lucky for you. I have the finest rations credits can buy," he said, trying to lighten the mood. Caliph tilted her head, watching him with curiosity as he rummaged through a storage compartment. He returned a moment later with a steaming bowl of synth stew, the closest thing his ship had to a decent meal. He handed it to her carefully. "It's not fancy, but it'll do the job," he said. Caliph accepted the bowl with both hands, her fingers trembling slightly. She stared at the contents for a moment before taking a tentative sip. Her eyes widened slightly, and Alex couldn't help but smile. "Good?" he asked. She nodded. "It's warm." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but there was a faint note of wonder in it. Alex leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "You can have as much as you want. You don't have to ration it, or save it for later." Caliph nodded again, though her expression remained cautious. Alex could see the layers of mistrust and fear that had been etched into her over time. He wanted to ask her what had happened, who had captured her, and how she'd ended up in that cage, but he knew better than to push her. Instead, he turned the conversation to safer ground. "So, Vixian. Huh? I've heard of your people, but I've never met one before. Caliph looked up at him, her golden eyes narrowing slightly. I doubt you'll meet another, she said, her tone bitter. Alex frowned. What do you mean? She set the bowl down on the cot beside her, her hands curling into fists. My people are gone, she said quietly. Our colony was destroyed, our cities burned, our ships torn apart. The ones who survived were hunted, sold, or worse. Alex felt a chill run down his spine. Who did this? Caliph's gaze hardened, her voice sharp. The Syndicate. They came for us in the night, their ships blocking out the stars. They said we had something they wanted, a mineral beneath our colony that was worth more to them than our lives. When we refused to give it to them, they took it by force. Alex clenched his jaw, his mind flashing back to his own time in the military. He'd seen the aftermath of Syndicate raids before, but hearing it firsthand from someone who had lived through it was different. I'm sorry, he said softly. Caliph's eyes flickered with anger. Why? You didn't do it. No, but... Alex paused, searching for the right words. I know what it's like to lose everything. I fought in a war once. A lot of good people didn't make it home. Caliph studied him for a moment, her expression softening slightly. Then you understand, she said. The chains may be gone, but the scars remain. The ship's comm system crackled to life, interrupting the moment. Approaching jump gate, the AI announced. Prepare for hyperspace transition. Alex pushed off the wall and headed toward the cockpit. Stay here and rest, he said over his shoulder. I'll handle the jump. Caliph didn't respond, but he could feel her eyes on him as he left the room. In the cockpit, Alex reviewed their route. He had plotted a course to Tarsus 3, a quiet frontier planet where he could lay low for a while. It wasn't much, but it was far from Syndicate territory, and that was what mattered most. As the ship entered the jump gate, the stars outside stretched into streaks of light before disappearing altogether. Alex leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He had done the right thing by freeing Caliph, but the weight of his decision was beginning to sink in. The Syndicate wouldn't let her go so easily. If they found out he had taken her, they'd come for him too. Alex's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the cockpit door. He turned to see Caliph standing in the doorway, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. Can I come in? She asked. Of course, Alex said, gesturing to the co-pilot's seat. She sat down carefully, her golden eyes scanning the controls. You're taking a risk, helping me, she said after a moment. Why? Alex shrugged. Because it was the right thing to do. Caliph tilted her head, as if the concept was foreign to her. Most people wouldn't risk their lives for a stranger. Most people aren't me, Alex replied with a small smile. Caliph didn't return the smile, but her expression softened. Thank you, she said quietly. Alex nodded, turning his attention back to the controls. You're welcome. Now let's get you somewhere safe. The quiet moment was shattered by a blaring alarm. Proximity alert, the AI announced. Unidentified vessels approaching. Alex's stomach sank as he checked the sensors. A squadron of Syndicate ships had emerged from hyperspace, their weapons hot and their engines burning toward his freighter. How did they find us? Caliph asked, her voice sharp with panic. I don't know, Alex said, his hands flying across the controls. But they're not here to negotiate. The first plasma bolt struck the ship's shields, jolting them violently. Caliph gripped the armrests of her seat, her golden eyes wide. What do we do? She asked. Alex's jaw tightened. We fight. Chapter 3. The Escape. The cockpit shuddered as another plasma bolt slammed into the ship's shields. Alex gritted his teeth, gripping the controls as he veered the freighter into a sharp dive. Behind them, the Syndicate fighters pursued with deadly precision, their sleek, black hulls glinting menacingly in the light of the distant star. They're not letting up. Alex growled, glancing at the shield's energy readout. It was dropping fast. One more direct hit, and they'd be defenseless. Caliph clung to the armrests of her seat, her golden eyes darting between the control panel and the viewport. What are you waiting for? Can't this thing go any faster? It's not a fighter. Alex snapped, flipping switches to divert more power to the engines. This is a cargo hauler, not a warship. The ship lurched again as another plasma round grazed the shields. Warning lights flashed across the console, and the AI's monotone voice filled the cockpit. Shields at critical levels. Structural integrity compromised. Kalitha's grip tightened. They're going to kill us, aren't they? Not if I can help it, Alex said, his voice steely. He flicked a switch, and the freighter's rear-facing cannons powered up with a low hum. Hold on. He yanked the controls to the side, sending the freighter into a spiraling roll. The maneuver threw off the Syndicate fighter's aim for a split, second long enough for Alex to fire the rear cannons. A barrage of plasma bolts streaked through space, striking one of the pursuing ships. The Syndicate fighter exploded in a brilliant flash of light, and Alex allowed himself a grim smile. That's one down. 4 to go, Kalith muttered, her voice tight with fear. The remaining fighters adjusted their formation, fanning out to flank the freighter. Alex cursed under his breath, realizing they were trying to box him in. He pushed the engines to their limit, the ship groaning in protest as it sped toward the asteroid field visible on the horizon. Kalitha's eyes widened as she saw their destination. You're not seriously going in there, are you? It's our only chance, Alex said. They'll tear us apart in open space. The asteroids will give us cover. And probably kill us in the process, Kalith muttered. Trust me, Alex said, his voice firm. The freighter plunged into the asteroid field, weaving between massive chunks of rock and debris. The Syndicate fighters followed, their sleek designs allowing them to navigate the treacherous terrain with ease. Proximity alert, the AI warned as a massive asteroid loomed ahead. I see it, Alex barked, banking hard to avoid a collision. The ship's hull scraped against the edge of the asteroid, sending a shower of sparks through the cockpit. Kalith gripped the seat tighter, her knuckles turning white. Do you even have a plan? Survive, Alex said bluntly, his focus unyielding. The Syndicate fighters were relentless, their plasma bolts lighting up the asteroid field like a deadly fireworks display. Alex's ship twisted and turned, narrowly avoiding each shot, but the strain on the freighter was beginning to show. We can't keep this up, Kalith shouted. I know, Alex snapped, scanning the field for anything he could use to his advantage. His eyes caught a glint of light A cluster of smaller asteroids orbiting a larger one. Inspiration struck. Hold on, Alex yelled, veering toward the cluster. The freighter dove into the swirling debris, narrowly avoiding collisions with the smaller rocks. The Syndicate fighters hesitated, their pilots clearly wary of the dense field. This is crazy, Kalith muttered, her voice barely audible over the alarms blaring in the cockpit. Crazy's all I've got right now, Alex replied. The freighter slipped through the debris, Alex expertly maneuvering around the swirling asteroids. The Syndicate fighters tried to follow, but the dense field worked to Alex's advantage. One of the fighters miscalculated, slamming into a rock and exploding in a fiery burst. Kalith let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That's 2. 3 more to go, Alex said, his voice grim. As they emerged from the asteroid field, Alex spotted a faint anomaly on the ship's sensors, spatial rift shimmering just beyond the debris. It was a jump point, unstable, but potentially their only chance at escape. Jump gate ahead, Alex said, pointing to the anomaly. Kalitha's eyes widened. That thing looks like it could tear us apart. It's either that or them, Alex said, jerking his head toward the remaining fighters. Kalith hesitated, then nodded. Do it. Alex pushed the engines to their limit, the freighter hurtling toward the rift. The Syndicate fighters fired relentlessly, plasma bolts streaking past the ship as it raced toward the jump point. The freighter shook violently as it entered the rift, the view outside the cockpit distorting into a kaleidoscope of colors. Alarms blared, and the ship's AI warned of critical structural damage, but Alex held his course. With a final jolt, the ship emerged from the rift into open space. The Syndicate fighters were gone, the jump point having severed their pursuit. Alex slumped back in his seat, his chest heaving. We made it. Kalith stared out the viewport, her golden eyes wide with disbelief. You're insane, she said, though there was a faint note of admiration in her voice. Alex chuckled weakly. I've been called worse. The freighter limped to a nearby system, where Alex set it down on a desolate moon. As the engines powered down, the silence in the cockpit was almost deafening. Kalith turned to Alex, her expression unreadable. You risked your life for me. Why? Alex shrugged, his usual bravado dimmed by exhaustion. Because someone had to. And because I couldn't stand the thought of leaving you in that cage. Kalith studied him for a moment, then nodded. Thank you, she said softly. Alex smiled faintly. Don't thank me yet. We've still got a lot of trouble ahead. Kalith's lips quirked into the barest hint of a smile. Then it's a good thing I'm used to trouble. Alex laughed, the tension in his chest easing slightly. For the first time, he felt like they might actually have a chance. But deep down, he knew the syndicate wouldn't stop hunting them. And the fight for Kalith's freedom was far from over. Chapter 4. A New Resolve. The freighter sat motionless on the desolate moon, its hull scorched and scarred from the syndicate attack. The planet's twin suns hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the rocky surface. Inside the ship, Alex and Kalith worked in tense silence, patching up what they could and assessing the damage. The hyperdrive's fried, Alex muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. We're not going anywhere until I can replace the coupler and restabilize the core. Kalith stood nearby, her gaze fixed on the viewport. She had been unusually quiet since their escape, her expression unreadable. Alex knew better than to push her, but the silence between them felt heavy, filled with unspoken fears and questions. Finally, Kalith broke the silence. They won't stop, you know. Alex looked up from the engine panel, frowning. The syndicate? She nodded, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. You've made yourself a target by helping me. They'll come for you, just like they came for my people. Alex leaned against the bulkhead, crossing his arms. Let them try. I've faced worse. Kalith's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. You're either very brave or very foolish. Probably both, Alex admitted with a shrug. But I'm not about to let them win. Not after what they did to you. Kalith's smile faded, her gaze growing distant. You don't understand. The syndicate doesn't just kill, they destroy. They take everything that makes you who you are and leave nothing behind. My people, we were proud, strong. Now we're nothing more than memories. You're wrong, Alex said firmly. You're still here. That means your people still have a chance. Kalith turned to him, her expression hard. A chance to what? Fight back? Rebuild? I've seen what happens to those who resist the syndicate. They're crushed. Then we'll crush them first, Alex said, his voice steely. Kalith stared at him, her golden eyes narrowing. You're serious. Dead serious, Alex replied. I didn't sign up for this fight, but now that I'm in it, I'm not backing down. Kalith was silent for a long moment, then nodded. If you're willing to fight, then so am I. But we'll need allies. Gathering strength. Over the next few days, Alex and Kalith worked tirelessly to repair the freighter and lay the groundwork for their next move. Alex reached out to old contacts, using encrypted comm channels to avoid detection. Some of his former comrades from the war were still scattered across the galaxy, and he hoped a few of them might be willing to help. Kalith, meanwhile, shared what she knew about the syndicate. Their operations were vast, spanning countless systems, but their leadership was concentrated in a single flagship known as the Obsidian Fong. If they could take out the flagship and its command structure, it might destabilize the entire organization. It's a long shot, Kalith admitted, as they reviewed the syndicate's fleet movements on a holographic display. But it's the only way to give us a real chance. Alex nodded, his mind racing. Then we'll make it happen. We just need the right team. Their first stop was a backwater station on the edge of syndicate territory, a haven for mercenaries and smugglers. It was here that Alex hoped to find Tara Kane, a former demolitions expert from his unit. She had a reputation for being unpredictable, but if anyone could help them blow the Obsidian Fong to pieces, it was her. The station was as grimy and chaotic as Alex remembered. He and Kalith navigated the crowded corridors, their every step watched by suspicious eyes. Kalith's presence drew attention, her lavender skin and glowing eyes marking her as something rare and exotic. Alex kept a protective hand near his sidearm, his expression warning off anyone who might get too close. They found Tara in a dimly lit cantina, nursing a drink that smelled like engine grease. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy braid, and her sharp green eyes lit up when she saw Alex. "Well, well," she said with a grin. "If it isn't Captain Merrick. I thought you were dead." "Not yet," Alex said, sliding into the seat across from her. "But I might be soon if you don't help me." Tara raised an eyebrow. "Help you with what?" He leaned in, his voice low. "Taking down the syndicate." Tara whistled softly. "Ambitious. What's the angle?" Alex gestured to Caliph, who had been standing silently nearby. She stepped forward, her golden eyes meeting Tara's. "They destroyed my people," Caliph said simply. "I want justice." Tara studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I'm in." The assault on the Obsidian Fong. With Tara's help, Alex and Caliph began assembling a plan to infiltrate the Syndicate flagship. They recruited a small team of specialists, including a hacker named Vex and a pilot known only as Shadow. Together, they formed a ragtag group with one goal: to strike a blow against the Syndicate that the galaxy would never forget. The plan was risky. Tara would plant explosives in the ship's main reactor, while Vex hacked the navigation systems to disable the flagship's defenses. Shadow would keep their escape route clear, and Alex and Caliph would lead the charge. As they approached the Obsidian Fong, the tension in the air was palpable. The ship loomed ahead, a massive, jagged construct that seemed to radiate menace. Syndicate fighters patrolled the area, their weapons hot. "Everyone ready?" Alex asked over the comms. "Ready as I'll ever be," Tara replied. "Let's do this," Caliph said, her voice steady. The infiltration was a blur of chaos and danger. Alarms blared as the team fought their way through the flagship's corridors, Syndicate guards swarming them at every turn. Tara's explosives rocked the ship, and Vex hacking caused systems to malfunction, creating chaos among the Syndicate forces. In the heart of the ship, Alex and Caliph confronted the Syndicate's leader, a towering figure in obsidian armor. The battle was fierce, but Caliph's resolve burned brighter than ever. With Alex's help, she struck the final blow, shattering the leader's helmet and ending his reign. A new beginning. As the Obsidian Fong exploded behind them, the team escaped aboard Shadow's ship, the flames of their victory lighting up the void. Caliph sat beside Alex in the cockpit, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "We did it," she said softly. Alex nodded. "Yeah, but the fight's not over." Caliph looked at him, a faint smile on her lips. "No, but we've shown them that we won't be chained anymore." Together, they turned their gaze to the stars, ready to face whatever came next.